The reMarkable Paper Pro was certainly one of the most hyped up e-ink announcements of last year. But in this video, I want to address the question of if it really lives up to the Pro name with the introduction of vibrant colors. Let's dive in and find out if such an expensive device is worth it for your note-taking needs. Now, one of the first things you'll notice with the Paper Pro is the premium metal build and the new glass screen that is textured on it. And it is still relatively thin at a hair over 5 millimeters thick. It is 525 grams now, so significantly heavier than a reMarkable 2, but it is a bigger device with a little bit more tech packed into it. And so when you put it into the Folio and you have the pen attached, under 800 grams, so about 1.7 pounds or so. So it is a relatively hefty device when you compare it to some of the competition in its kind of category. Two small things I've noticed with the design. So it does get a little bit hotter in this area down here, which is perhaps where the CPU is. I haven't seen the internals of it, so I'm not exactly sure, but that would be my guess. But that typically happens when I'm drawing for extended sessions. We'll get into drawing a little bit later. And then the other thing is a slight coil whine. And I've only really noticed this when you are flipping through PDF pages and it's like dead silent in the room. And then I can notice it a little bit, but it is not something that bothers me at all. It also has these nice big rubber feet on it, which I much prefer over the reMarkable 2's options of little feet. I had an issue in my reMarkable 2 where mine just popped out and was really small, and I never found it, obviously. So it's nice to see these big feet, and it has really good grip on most surfaces. And that does help it seat into the Folio a little bit better with the recesses here. And we will talk about the Folio options a little bit later. Now, getting into the star of the show, the screen. I will start with some of the positives and then move on to the negatives of it. It is a really nice sweet spot versus some of these 10.7 inch screens or the A4 sizes, which are 13.3 inches and can be a little bit unwieldy sometimes. So this is that nice kind of middle ground compromise of something that's a little bit smaller than an actual sheet of paper, but gives you that extra real estate that makes note-taking a breeze, especially with some of the workflow features we'll talk about later. But it's really that nice sweet spot between the A5 and the A4 size at 11.8 inches, which is really nice when you're reading PDFs, books, graphic novels, things like that. It just makes it that much more legible because of the size. Now, Gallery was previously thought to be kind of a dead tech when it launched in the Big Me device, which was a much smaller device, but it was so slow with the flashing and was kind of rendered useless in most senses that that device really barely saw the light of day besides some initial launch that it had. But what reMarkable did here with e-ink is pretty remarkable in the sense that they took a technology that was previously thought to be dead and they basically limited the color amounts. So it does 20,000 colors, where I think the original Gallery 3 did about 50,000. And so by limiting that, they were able to fine tune them and have some rendering options that make it more usable. And the speed, while still slow, you'll see some of the flashing, is actually more usable than that Big Me device was that had insanely slow render times and flashing out the wazoo. So that is nice to see here. And it's clear that they've been working on this for a while. And the yellows, the cyans, and magentas, those are the part of the CMYK color palette. So the way it works is it's bringing those pixels to the surface, and then it's mixing them with the new shader tool. I talk a little bit about this more in my drawing review of this and some other stuff that I've done, if you'd like to check any of these out. Now, because of the Gallery tech, they did have to add a front light. Let me turn it off here just so you can see it next to a black and white reader. But you'll see, and we're under direct light here, but you'll see it's a lot more gray than the black and white kind of most modern screens is this Carta 1300. I did a full comparison of the Manta A5X2, but bottom line, because of the Gallery technology, which is more inherently gray, they had to add this front light, and there are 5 levels here. It is not the most uniform light, and it doesn't get the brightest, but that being said, you can nitpick all day. For my general purposes for it, I've found it to be adequate. I've never been in a situation where I was like, I wish it was a lot brighter. Could it be a little bit brighter? Yes, but for general purpose use, I do find it good. I kind of hover between the 3, 4, 5 range. If it's really dark, I'll maybe put it on 3. In most scenarios, I'll have it on 4, but sometimes when it's not dark and you don't have direct lighting on it, the 5 setting is nice. So the resolution on the Paper Pro is 229 ppi, so only 3 ppi higher than the reMarkable 2, but compared to the competition, which would be these Kaleido 3 screens, it does have a higher ppi. These have 300 ppi in black and white, but when they go to color, they're 150 ppi. So that is something that the reMarkable does have a little bit more resolution, but I do sometimes notice graininess in PDFs that I've imported, and I think that's just inherent to the gallery technology. It also now has a textured glass, so I'm in a PDF here, and that textured glass gives it a very pencil and paper feel. In terms of the screen size, I do still think there will be some equivalent of an A5 replacement of the reMarkable 2, so like a reMarkable 3. This is something that is, I think, different in that sense. Like, this is their Pro lineup. I do still think this year they're going to come out with something that is the A5 size, maybe even something smaller at some point. And that brings us right into the pen. So the magnet for the pen is very strong now. As you can see, that was one of my biggest complaints on the reMarkable 2, was every time you'd put it in and out of a bag, it would fall, you'd lose it. That is no longer the case with the Folio features as well. And so going back to the gallery screen, because they wanted to add a front light for it, I believe that's why they switched to the new USI standard. It is not a Wacom pen anymore, which are the typical ones on the market here that are kind of the standard, these Wacom EMRs, which are electromagnetic resonance. This is now a battery stylus, and the battery is rated at 100 hours, so it charges right when you put it on the kind of dock here. My one reservation about this is who knows how replaceable the battery is. If you are someone that uses this device extensively and very frequently, who knows how long the battery will last and if that's even serviceable. I don't think anyone's done a teardown, but if someone does a teardown, I'll link below how replaceable that is. reMarkable has stated that this device is easier to replace now, but I don't think that's by the general public. So you as a user, you're not going to be able to easily access this because it's still adhesives and is a little more difficult to get into. But apparently, if you take it to a repair shop, maybe it has to be like an authorized dealer, or you send it to reMarkable, it will be easier to replace, but it is nowhere near the replaceability of something like the Manta, where you can actually just get into the back here and do it all yourself with a screwdriver. They moved away from the Wacom EMR technology that was on the reMarkable 2, which means that you are not going to be able to use any of your favorite pens that you might already have in your collection on this device. You will need to get the Marker or the Marker Plus, which are the USI 2.0 standard. And what that also means is there is now something called Wobble that has been introduced, where when you draw lines, there are these little micro, little wobbles. And while yes, there is now straight line snapping like that, and there is shape recognition, that is something that if you are drawing, you will notice sometimes, or if you're doing a lot of graphs, math equations, things like that, that is something that can be introduced because of the USI standard. But basically the reason they did that was to remove the Wacom layer, I believe, in the device, which allows them to have a closer pen to paper distance. And that is something that has improved from the reMarkable 2. It went from 940 something to down to 920 something. And they were able to seed in the front light there, which they needed because of the gallery screen. And the pen, I'm sure if you've seen any content on this, you know that it has a tapping sound. So every time you kind of remove and press down, when you're writing, it's fine because you just hear a scratch. But every time you kind of get on it, you have that tapping sound, which doesn't actually bother me that much. But if you're pretty sensitive to that, that could be something that is an annoyance for you. And then one other thing I was surprised is because this is supposed to be a pro level device, I would have expected the pen to have a button on it and be like a pro pen. Maybe that's still something they could come out with in the future, because that is really useful for highlighting, right? You can just tap the button and highlight right away instead of having to tap, maybe unhide your menu setting, switch to the highlighter, go back, etc. That is something that I really think they should have come out with. And I was actually surprised that they didn't. Now getting back to the Folio, there are a lot of options. The basic ones are not that expensive, or the leather ones are more expensive, but they have a clever little latch system here in the back that is very nice and sits flat when you're using it. And then when you're traveling, you can just pop it around. And that stronger magnet with this, you are not going to get this dislodged. I've never had it come out, and that is really good to see. Something that was a huge pain point of the reMarkable 2. But one way you can save a little bit of money is the IO2 Folio, which is about 30 to 40 bucks. It is a pretty good case, and you can get that for much, much cheaper than the folios that reMarkable offers. So if you're trying to save a little money, that is a good way to do so. The base price is probably not going to be any less than $600. And when you start to factor in the pens and the folios, it does really start to get up there. And then like I mentioned, in terms of the app and the syncing, even though you need to pay a Connect subscription, I do think reMarkable's app is one of the best in the game. It syncs super fluidly. It syncs almost immediately on document close. And that's something that I've talked about Supernote. I would like to see that improved here, because even though you do have to pay for it, it is kind of the best-in-class experience for the app syncing between different devices. But it is running a custom Linux Codex UX, and it is very simple. We'll talk a little bit about the organizational workflow now. While the reMarkable is a nice and organized device, I would like to see more features come from the Supernote, because these are the two kind of flow champion devices. They just have zero distractions, and they keep you in that kind of flow state. So I would like to see some of the workflow / organizational things in the Supernote platform come to this, because for me, I use this more for like strategy and basic stuff right now, because it is a little more simplistic in its searchability and your kind of organizational workflow like I was talking about. While it is still just like a paper replacement, this is a much smarter paper replacement. Also, they do offer a type folio for this. I've reviewed the type folio in general for reMarkable here if you want to check that out, but all of that should apply to this device as well, with the added benefit that they now have wider margins available for the typing. I'd still like to see spell check on that. By far one of my favorite features on here. On my laptop, I can actually just use the Chrome extension they have, and then it just sends the page that I'm looking at, so like a document or an article I'm reading, on the computer. So instead of having like 20 Chrome tabs built up, I can just transfer them onto here quickly and then just read them on here later and annotate them as well. And that kind of brings me into PDFs. The PDF support is good. The document formats are pretty limited on here. I'll put on screen a comparison to the Supernote document formats, but getting the PDFs on here is pretty easy. You can just print a screen on your phone, transfer it in the app, get it on here, or like I was saying, in the Chrome extension or the desktop app, which is very good, like I was talking about. You can just get that on here easily. But I'm planning on doing an OCR, which is the optical character recognition comparison between these two devices. So I'll make a short on those to see which one's more accurate. But in general, it is pretty good on here, and it is in the cloud, so it has improved, but the OCR is not searchable. So that's one of the things I was talking about on the Supernote, which I find invaluable. So when I take more advanced notes, I always do them in that. The ability to screen share is great too. You can directly do that on the device, and maybe you're presenting a meeting, you can share some of your notes, or you can live annotate or draw things and show some of your workflow on the device. And they recently just added the ability to have blank templates. So if you use a template very often, refreshing that and using blank ones, or you can have ones that just reset back to the kind of standard that you want. I do plan on doing kind of a reMarkable workflow template video, so stay tuned for that if you want to check that out. I also plan on doing a video about tips and tricks for the reMarkable 2 or the reMarkable Paper Pro in the past 8 years that I've been using these devices. Now with the workflow, here's a quick comparison to the Supernote, which I talked about in my full comparison, but I think it's relevant here too. All right, so in terms of the organizational workflow, there's quite a difference. The Supernote platform has a lot more organization. So there's headings where you can create table of contents. It has keywords. It has star functionality where you can quickly do a star and it will recognize it, and then it'll save those and you can search. The OCR also happens in the background, so it converts everything in the background so everything's searchable. You can link things like this website here, for example. If I click here, it'll go to the website if I was on the internet. So on the reMarkable, the organizational workflow is very simple. It's basically just like digital paper. You have to create tags for everything that you want to be searchable. And so there's a big difference in those. And then really quickly, just in terms of the actual like functionality of the paper, you cannot scroll up or down. You cannot pinch or zoom. Whereas this, you have the ability to infinitely scroll down. You can basically zoom in or out up to, I think, 5 times and then down to 0.5. So it creates this kind of infinite canvas kind of style. So there's a big difference between the two in that sense. And then they have done studies with the color and your brain and how that actually does improve your memory and comprehension and whatnot. So I do think there's definitely value in color workflow, but for me personally, I've found that the color workflow, because of the flashing and like that is very distracting to me. And so I generally just prefer black and white note taking. So I think it's really important to evaluate how crucial color note taking is to you in your usage, and maybe you like just the way it looks better. So just know there are trade-offs. If you are just using this in black and white, you will not get that flashing that I'm talking about. It's only when you introduce the color palette that you get that. And then for books in general, there are ways to export from Kindle and EPUB, but it's rather tricky and difficult. So it's not something that I'm gonna like say that you can do easily, but you can get EPUBs on here and read those. And then you can get PDF formats of books as well. But in general, the document support on here is not great. But if you like reading graphic novels, newspapers, magazines, books that are in color, these things can be nice on here because it does give that added kind of pop. And I've kind of enjoyed that on here. It is a big device, so not like using this thing in bed, but if you're on a table or if it's on your lap or something, then it's typically fine. The colors are a tiny bit more muted sometimes on Kaleido, but the fact that the front light gets brighter does have more reflectancy on the pixels, and you have access to like Android apps, so like you can integrate your Excel docs, your Word docs, all that. And so for some people, maybe like the Note Air 4C could be a better option, and it is cheaper because this is a very expensive device. I personally don't feel that it lives up to the Pro name. It is definitely a better device than the reMarkable 2, but the flashing and the full re-rendering that is somewhat slow is a little bit distracting in my opinion. And in instances, you can see right here, as I'm loading stuff on this drawing I did, as I turn off layers, and so watch, I will turn them all on now. You can see how long it takes to load. Still loading, and there we go. It is faster than the reMarkable 2, but like I was saying, I don't feel like it fully lives up to the Pro name for me in most aspects. It does feel like a more pro level device, but having no Pro Pen and these kind of compromises I've talked about are a little bit of a downside to me, but I do still think it's a generally very good device. For people that want a true yellow highlight, this is certainly your best option. I really do enjoy sketching on it, and I think that's actually been the thing I've been using it the most for, and the 11.8 inch size. It's a very unique size in the e-ink world, and something that no other device really offers. And so the combination of those two has made me really like it for a kind of drawing palette. And I have had to learn a little bit about how to use the shader tool on it, but it is pretty fun. You can check out a drawing video here if you'd like to see that. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.